Good morning, everybody. Sorry for the delay or the technical issues, actually. So let's get back to you. So the open up. What is it exactly? Open up. It's a life talk. I want to bring people, individual, and then hear their stories, hear their challenges, life journey. So whoever is listening on the other end, they can change their mind set, thinking pattern. So it will help somewhere, somehow, in their life. Open Up is actually it is a part of Voice of Men 360. It is an organization. We are focusing on the well-being of boys and men. It is part of IMD, International Men's Day. International Men's Day is a global organization. They are focusing on 6 pillars. So let me share the 6 pillars, and then you get an idea. One, to promote positive male role models, not just movie stars and sportsmen, but everyday working class men who are living decent, honest lives. To celebrate men's positive contributions to the society, community, family, marriage, childcare, and the environment. Third one, to focus on men's health and well-being, social, emotional, physical, and spiritual. Fourth one, to highlight discrimination against men in areas of social services, social attitudes, and expectations and law. To improve gender relations and promote gender equality. To create a safer, better world where people can be safe and grow to reach their full potential. These are the 6 pillars IMD actually focusing on. So far, 90 countries joined, and then they are taking a number of activities on a regular basis. So IMD has a story, or about 20 years has a story. So let me get into the program right now. The individual I want to bring is actually, I always believe everything happening for a reason, right? So I'm proud to say that, I'm humbled to say that we are part of Dr. D. Martini's class students, and we met there. That's where our friendship started. So since then, he's helping in some ways, and I'm helping him. So these are the relations starts. So I'm actually delighted and excited to bring him, because his life journey, whenever I was sitting with him and then listen to him, it's really making a big, huge impact in me. So that's why his life experience, his message can make some kind of positive impact in your life, somebody's life at some point. So please welcome Matthew.
Yeah, thanks, Shivam. It's great to be here, and I look forward to sharing my story.
Thank you. Let's hear about yourself. Give us some brief introduction. So we will go from start here.
Sure. So, I've been on this journey of self-discovery since 2012, I guess officially, and in 2010 is really where I had my first wake-up call, and I kind of was forced onto this path. But in 2012 is where I guess I submitted to it, and really had a willingness to pursue this idea of reaching my full potential as a man, as a human being. And that led me into the coaching field, where in 2014, I began a year-long coaching apprenticeship. And that led me into coaching business professionals, people on a personal level, but also sharing with young men, teenage and young adult men, about the struggles of life that I'd had navigated. And I did find a passion for that. And that's been part of my practice ongoing for a few years now. As I feel it's a good way to give back to the community. And my evolution of my work has transformed into really working with the subconscious mind and all of the programs that run us. It's a big challenge, particularly for a young man, to navigate life. And a lot of that programming, a lot of that confusion, a lot of that misdirection comes from a very young age, typically before age 6 or 7. a lot of our programming is imprinted, and then we kind of spend the rest of our lives trying to undo what our parents did to us. I'm kind of joking a little bit, but a lot of that programming is genetic. A lot of it's learned from our environment. So my work is really about undoing that programming and allowing any human being, but in this context, young men and adult men, to undo the programming and become the best version of themselves.
Yeah, it's a very interesting. I want to take you back, let's say, 5 or 10 or 15 years age. Those years. Can you share some of those, situations, or how was your life, and then how did it impact any inspiration? Of course, you should know, or that those years, whatever happens in our early childhood, it will actually impact in our later years. So let's hear some of those moments, though.
Yeah, absolutely. So my parents divorced when I was 3. And even when I was born, it was a conflicting environment. They weren't meant to be together. It was like oil and water, my mom and dad. So straight away, I was born into conflict. And I just grew up naturally having a lot of anger and anxiety and fear and things of that nature. And that was just what I thought the world was. I grew up in that environment.
Mhm.
When my parents divorced at age 3, I lived with my mom predominantly, and I would visit my dad every second weekend. So I really didn't grow up with a strong male role model in any way. And my mom had other relationships, none of which were really conducive to having a healthy male mindset about the world. My mom was in survival mode right from the get-go. Worked, a lot of different jobs, never had a stable career.
Mhm.
Money was a challenge. It was most likely the child support from my dad that really helped us stay above the poverty line. And so that was a critical challenge, and I lived that way from age 3 really up until age 17,
Mhm.
not knowing difference, not knowing that that people were living happily ever after, that people were living with confidence. I obviously saw people being successful, but I didn't know what that meant. I had no idea how to attain it, and my level of ignorance and naivete at the time just kept it totally distant from me. So it just wasn't in my world at all. And then at age 17 is when I kind of hit a breaking point. I realized that I wasn't happy with my life. I wasn't happy with my upbringing. I wasn't happy with my social situation. So I began using cannabis to cope with the emotions. I'd had a massive buildup of anger and frustration and anxiety about my life. And so when I started using cannabis, it did 2 things. Number one, it allowed me to relax a little bit, and that's the design of that. I guess it has medicinal purposes for that use, but also it helped me fit in with my peers because for the first time ever, I was actually becoming, I guess, more popular and having more friends and becoming more social and just being more casual and relaxed.
Mhm.
So that was great for the first time ever. But I polarized completely because I'd been living in total fear up to that point about everything, about getting good grades in school, about going to school, about behaving a certain way.
Mhm.
So I polarized the complete opposite. I said, you know what, I don't want to play by these rules anymore. I want to play by my own rules, so to speak, which just happened to be very negligent and ultimately self-abusing, although I didn't realize it at the time. So I stopped going to school, and that caused a big conflict with my mom where I ended up going to actually live with my dad at age 17. And that was the beginning of a brand new chapter for me, which was born of even greater struggle because I ended up going to an alternative high school when I was in grade 11. And the alternative high school that I went to was predominantly young men, probably 80–90% young men, ages 18 and 19. And they'd all either been kicked out of school, dropped out of school, and that most of them had some kind of criminal involvement. They'd been arrested at some point in their young lives. So that became my core group. So I got into I continued with the cannabis use, but I also got into drinking and eventually smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. And I even got involved in financial crime for a very short period of time with probably the first real male role model that I had, who I looked up to in a sense. And I mean, I don't want to discount my relationship with my dad. I definitely looked up to him, and he was a role model in certain respects, but he just wasn't in my life consistently enough for that to impact my life permanently or make a real imprint on my demeanor. So when I was 17, I met this friend who was a couple years older than me, and he had trouble in his past, and he had mental challenges as well with needed certain medications, dealt with depression and things like that. But he embraced me as a friend, and I never really had a big brother in my life or someone like that. So I tagged along and just kind of rode his coattails with what we did. And eventually that led to getting involved with this financial crime, which he had initiated. And it was interesting. I mean, it was kind of fun and exciting because at that time, the kind of role model that I looked up to outside of my internal life was Tony Soprano. So while most young men are in the self-development world are looking like Tony Robbins, I was looking up to Tony Soprano. So I really admired that kind of gangster criminal lifestyle on TV because it's glamorized and it's portrayed in a certain way. And these men, they had like power and control, and they weren't victims.
Yeah.
And that was very appealing to me because I felt the complete opposite. I felt like a victim of life. So I polarized into that and got involved in this criminal world a little bit, not really deep. I learned my lessons pretty quick. Had a few run-ins with the police and realized I just don't want to go down that road. It's not for me. And I got really lucky too. And I believe in karma. I believe that everything's meant to happen as it does. So, I learned what I needed to learn from that and moved on. And eventually that role model, who was my best friend at the time, he, as I said, he was a couple years older than me. So when he got around his mid-20s, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and he actually went insane. He went nuts. He threatened to kill me. And that was the last time I ever spoke with him. So it's interesting how we go through these phases of life. Like that literally ended. Like I had no choice, but that phase of my life ended because once he threatened to kill me, I'm like, well, I did make one attempt to reach out to him, but it didn't work. And at that point, I decided not to pursue it any further. And that ended that whole chapter. The whole criminal stuff, most of the behavior ended. I did continue with drinking and smoking, and I was looking for love in all the wrong places and that sort of thing. And in 2010, so about 10 years ago, almost exactly 10 years ago, I was pulled over for speeding. I'd been drinking, and simultaneously I was in school for criminology because I had this fascination with crime. And I kind of decided, okay, well, I'm not going to go into the the criminal side. Maybe I'll go on the law enforcement side. But I knew that if I had any kind of criminal record, I couldn't get into that industry. So I was, really still sorting out my behavior. I was still polarized in a lot of respects, doing a lot of, not behavior that I wouldn't condone, and was probably not in my best interest. But I was driving home. It was like 2 a.m. on I think a Monday morning. It was a Labor Day weekend in September 2010. And I was supposed to begin my 4th year of criminology later that day. I've been drinking. I was driving home, speeding on the 401 up here in Toronto, Canada. And the speed limit is 100 kilometers an hour, which is 60 miles per hour. And we have a law here that if you're going 50 kilometers or more over, your car can be impounded. You can get arrested, and there's a whole deal around that. And so I was really close to that mark, and I was the only car on the road. And as I'm driving, I'm feeling like in some respects, from a very ignorant standpoint, I felt invincible, like I could do no wrong, but it felt very arrogant, very egotistical. And I remember having that thought or feeling, and simultaneously, and this goes back to some of what Dr. DeMartini says, is simultaneously I had a thought of being like my luck might run out. So I had the dualistic thinking like simultaneously. And like a minute after having that thought, like, hey, my luck might run out sometime, I then see this police officer in the same direction I am,
Right.
on the other side of the divider, but he sees me. I know that he sees me. I just, you can know, and obviously it's the only car on the road. And he pulls me over, and in my mind, I'm like, well, I can't afford to comply with him in any way. Like if he asks me to get out of the car or anything, like I can't comply because I'm going the speed limit I am. I've been drinking.
Right.
So my career in law enforcement will essentially come to an end if I comply with this guy. So I'm like, I have to somehow talk my way out of this. That was my thinking at the time. I'm 23 years old, really naive about the world, thinking that I could somehow talk my way out of this. So the officer walks up to my car. I was driving a Honda Civic. I rolled down my window, and he asked me to get out of the vehicle. He doesn't ask me. He just really barks at me. Get out of the car. I can smell alcohol. That's what he says. And I just refused. I said, no, I'm not getting out of the car. And, I'm on my way home. I'm not getting out of the car. And then I lit a cigarette while seated in my vehicle, just to, force in or emphasize that, I wasn't going anywhere. The height of arrogance, really. But it was just all fear. I was super fearful underneath, but I just, I was like, no, I'm not doing anything. So he called for backup, and then he tried to pull me out of the car. Like he tried to open the door, and I closed the door, and there was kind of, a bit of a struggle there, so to speak. But it basically escalated to where after I closed the door, he reached in and he tried to pull me out through the open window by my collar.
Oh.
And then once he touched me, just instinctively, I got him off me. I grabbed his wrists to get him off me. And the moment I touched this guy, he just started pummeling me in the face, just a full-on police assault through the window. And he was a pretty big guy, like 5'10", 240 pounds sort of thing. He looked like a bruiser. So, this wasn't his first time doing this. And then he got into the vehicle on top of me, and he kept wailing away, and then eventually pulled me out. And then I was on the side of the 401 on the freeway looking up at the stars. It's 2 a.m. And by that time, the backup had arrived. So there were red and blue lights everywhere. And there was about 5 or 6 officers circling around me. Mm-hmm. And this assault continued. And I'm pretty sure it was the same officer where I got kicked in the ribs and I got kicked in the face. I had this big boot mark on my face for 2 or 3 weeks after. And fortunately, I healed from all these things, but I looked beat up, man. Like it was definitely, we took photos, and it was a real assault. And just to witness it happening was spectacular. Just to see, like, hey, this police assault stuff actually happens, And one of the other officers, he reached into my car after I had been handcuffed, and he grabbed my car keys. And where I'd been pulled over, for anyone in the Toronto area, it was just at the Scarborough-Pickering border at Port Union Road. And it's just at this overpass where there's forest below the freeway. So this officer grabs my car keys from the car, and he throws my car keys into the overpass, into the forest.
Wow.
And I saw him do it, right? And it was just like remarkable to see that this happens. And then I was arrested and taken to the police station, and my dad was called, and he came to pick me up. And we dealt with it. We dealt with it appropriately, hired a lawyer. It took about 1.5 years to work through the whole process of going to court every month. And the police, they know how to work the system. So they withheld the information. It's called disclosure, that our lawyer had been requesting, and they just trickled it out. So it trickled out a little bit. And for the first year, even the first 1.5 years, really, it was a lot of unhelpful stuff. And because there's just reports that don't really mean anything. Now, we did get video footage of me in the holding cell having the breathalyzer test, where it was clear there were injuries, plus my dad had taken photos. So we were good. We had pure evidence that I'd been assaulted. But really what we needed more than anything, we wanted the access to the medical report, which would have determined like what had happened. That would have been the story about what had happened. They withheld that for 1.5 years. And it wasn't until that happened in September 2010. It was around I think, well, it was towards it might have been like beginning of 2012 when the whole thing wrapped up.
Mm-hmm.
And they withheld this medical report, which we finally got. And it said exclusively on there, explicitly, that there were no injuries to me. So that I was lucky. I mean, I knew I wasn't living right. I knew I wasn't doing the
Right.
right thing. So I don't condone my behavior by any means, but I also don't condone physical violence at
Mm-hmm.
all. It's virtually never appropriate. Um, and and so the judge just threw all the charges out. I'd had several charges laid against me for driving and drinking and driving and resisting arrest and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it just was all removed. And and it's not like, oh, I got off free or anything like that. I mean, I took it as a lesson for sure. I learned everything that I needed from it, and I never felt compelled to press charges simply because that just didn't seem appropriate. I knew I wasn't doing the right things. I never really felt like a victim, despite, I mean, yeah, was I a victim of police assault? Absolutely. But I never felt like a victim in the sense that I never felt victimized. And I always felt like I created it myself based on my decisions. So that was my first wake up call, is coming to that realization. And I'll just wrap that story up really quick here, is that I eventually discovered self development. And by the summer 2012, I got involved in listening to audio programs about how to be, a better human being type of thing. And by the fall of 2012, so it really was 2 full years, where I got involved in self development groups and mastermind groups and groups of positive minded people. And I really started to build a support system for myself, which became the launching pad for what we'll talk about in
Yeah.
the next.
So I just want to ask you about those exactly movement. Like the Martini says, is saying that the one is the wake up call. So what have you seen, or did you had a thought, or like any kind of like a positive, or any kind of like a light, something that imaginary things, you see that moment, anything particularly, can you remember anything, any uh, not only that incident, or any other incident, like specifically, because when you say that one is a wake up call, so can you describe something? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the time when it was happening, it didn't necessarily seem positive. Um, in hindsight, it was the greatest gift, because what Martini talks about is the idea of polarization. So if you get too far out of balance, life will show you how to get into balance. And it's different for everyone. Everyone has a different threshold.
Right.
And that's why we said before, like, about the idea of karma, everything happens for a reason. So I believe that I hit my threshold of negativity in life, and this was a way of balancing me out. So that the most positive thing that came out of it is that I just didn't continue for very long after with the self-abuse. And it took 2 years to really progressively realize that, what I've been doing wasn't the way to live, or wasn't the most successful way to be. However, once that happened in the summer of 2012, where I got into these audio programs, and I started listening to a gentleman named Kevin Trudeau, who I don't necessarily recommend, but at the time that was the most appropriate training for me. And then he had created a community of like-minded people who wanted to support one another in terms of their dreams and goals. So that was really the positive in the overall aspect, is that became the catalyst for me to find these positive-minded communities.
Mm-hmm.
And then that became the catalyst for me to become enter into the coaching world, which happened in 2014.
You touched, actually, I mean, you talk about early life, like those 3 years old, even 5 or 10 years old. But let's if you can, if you're willing to, I know you can do it. The relationship, early years between your father and you, and also later years, like the situation after he helped, after you were arrested and things like that, just
Yeah.
from a boy side, like how did you feel, and then how did you nowadays,
Yeah. Well, like as a child, I mean, I definitely respected my dad and looked up to him for answers and things of that nature. The challenge that I had with him, though, was my mom had so much, and the word hatred might be too strong, but it was this like deep animosity towards my dad, and she was, to say mentally imbalanced, what I mean by that is like she was dealing with a lot of stress, and when someone has a lot of stress, they're going to become mentally imbalanced. So she doesn't have any disorder per se, and she's living peacefully now. But at the time, she was undergoing a lot of stress, so she couldn't see things clearly, and she definitely felt like she was a victim of the circumstance.
Yeah.
And so she carried this just negativity towards my dad, and she tried to be nice about it and not paint that picture of him for me, but she felt it deep within herself, and you can't lie about that, and children pick that stuff up so easy.
Of course. Yeah.
So that's what I grew up with this image where like, well, I love my dad, I respect my dad, but he's a bad man. Right. And so I had that dichotomy for years until my teens and into my 20s. And it's really only in the past 2 or 3 years where I've gotten to see my dad from a neutral lens.
Yeah.
And, I'm not saying like he's the world's greatest father or the world's greatest man, but he's very successful in business, and he lives by principles, and he has a lot of integrity, and he does his absolute best. And he hasn't had to live in that kind of survival mode mindset that my mom did. It's just they've lived completely different lives. So in the beginning years, it was challenging. I had a lot of fear being around my dad. I had a lot of anxiety. I couldn't express myself to him because I didn't feel like he was open to listen. I didn't feel like he was open to hear what I had to say. And it's really only in the last 2 or 3 years where I've shared with him some of these experiences that I've had in the distant past. And but I'd say today our relationship is like really, I mean, it's the best it's ever been for sure. And he's not like, him and I are like completely different in terms of how we view the world, but there's definitely a deep love there. And I would want to have him in my life for always. I wouldn't want to abandon that in any way.
I want to ask you one thing before we go to the next question, though. So you talk about your father, of course. Have you thought about it, or have you talked to him about, because sometimes, or most of the times, in many cases, or it's not only you, to all of us, right? Many of us, we don't know like what's their background, right? I mean, they don't really open their heart, and then they don't tell, even from our mom or any grandparents, or we don't have any idea, right? We just see as a father, nothing else, right? So have you talked to him, or like have you discovered, okay, what his past life was like this, or his father, I mean your grandfather, because the environment, of course, it makes a huge difference, right? So have you discovered something like that, or did you have any kind of like a open conversation with your dad lately?
So that's a great question. All the stories that I've heard about my dad's childhood have either come from my grandma, so his mom, or my mom. So obviously my parents, they knew one another in high school. So my mom witnessed my dad growing up and kind of the challenges that he had with his dad. But my dad himself has never opened up with that. Any conversations we've had around that are usually as far back as they go to his history, is maybe the beginning of his career, which would be like his late 20s, mid to late 20s. We've never talked about childhood ever, really. And that's a fascinating point, because I'll be honest with you, Sivam, until you asked me that question, I never even thought about opening that door with him, because it was never there. It was never apparent. So I think that's a really relevant question.
Yeah, because why is I heard a number of times, especially one incident. I wouldn't say one it's an incident because of course you come across Think and Grow Rich. I just recall his name, but he was sharing one story after he finished the one seminar, Think and Grow Rich. He was teaching just one person. That lady came to the seminar, and then he was teaching, and so all these years he had some kind of problems or issues with his her dad. So in after a couple of days or something like that, middle of the night, he actually got an email. This is a long email, and then he actually showed to us that that lady talked to his dad, her dad, for after a long time, like I wouldn't say like maybe 20, 30, 40 years or something like that, and then found out that because of the way he was growing, and then his father was treating in different ways or abused or any something like that. So he didn't. I mean, she didn't have the role model or the father figure in her life all these years because they're kind of like angry, and no, he never opened his heart, and then he never talked about anything. So he's only as an anger man. So that letter shows like because of this. So they are in a very good relationship. So we don't know because it's very easy to blame somebody right away. We can point somebody, finger somebody, but we don't know their background, their early childhood, or even their father's figure, right? Nobody is there to because not only in one particular culture, but in generally speaking, all over world, just a man is a man. Like I don't know where it's coming from that, but it's a man is a man. So you cannot cry, you cannot share anything, and then if you share something, it's a kind of like a shame. So things like that. Over centuries and centuries, we are tuned to that, or we've grown in that environment, right? So it's just we caught up in the it's a wrong path. Of end of the day, it's a soul is a soul. There's no difference, right? Yeah. So that's what I just want to ask you because sometimes, of course, it's a healing part, and then you can think and then you can share your fathers too because it makes huge difference, though, right? You can realize something because one day, sometimes. When you become a father, you also are going to be a role model too, right? So let's talk about um, the point you were started helping those young men, the youths, and then what did you see the common factor, or what's the major challenges they went through? Let's talk about that.
Well, the major challenge is exactly as I've been describing, is not having that strong, healthy male role model. And I think when a young man doesn't have that, they lose a sense of self-image, sense of direction, a sense of confidence. And when any human being's missing those things, obviously it's kind of like being a ship without a rudder. You're kind of just floating through life, as I experience. So I think, with having a strong female role model like a mom, like you're getting a lot of nurturing and love, and then the man, I think, points the direction.
Yeah.
I mean, to just traditionally, and it's kind of a stereotypical example, but if you think of a family driving in the car, it's usually the dad driving, usually, right? And so, typically that's where that directional mindset comes from. And if a young man doesn't have that, then they can lose sight of what they're doing. They may not have goals. I certainly had no goals until I got into my early to mid 20s. And so, that's a really important aspect from my perspective. And how do you do that? I mean, is it just about spending time with someone and having conversations? I think that's certainly an element of it, for sure. And I think the more young men can plug in to a community where there's men willing to mentor and share their experience, I think that's really important. My capacity has been mostly in the coaching realm, so I really help young men release all those subconscious programs from their early age, typically between 6 and 7, when they create that stuff or when they're exposed to it. We release all that. So the ideas of having a lack of self-worth or feeling inadequate or feeling lack of approval or lack of love or lack of respect or lack of being validated, all those things we release, and from there they end up feeling like a full potential human being, which is our most natural state. It's not something that we have to like create necessarily. It's not like you have to install confidence. No, what you have to do is let go of the lack of confidence, and then you'll naturally find your inner source of confidence. So that's typically where my work's evolved too. But there's certainly a component of conversation and just helping young men understand who they are, what they want out of life, what direction they want to take, without having an agenda too, because that's another challenge that parenting can have, is even if they want the child to be free and to be themselves, most parents are still going to have some kind of bias towards what that looks like. And from my perspective, a parent's position and a role model's position is to provide all the resources and support for the growth of the child, but the child's going to grow towards whatever light is best for them. And I'm thinking of an analogy of like a plant growing, is we provide the fertile soil, the water, but the sun is obviously maybe the most essential, although all the ingredients are very essential. And that plant's going to grow towards the sun, that light, whatever position. So we can't control that really. I mean, we can, when you first plant, if a flower or something, you can give it extra support so it grows properly, but eventually it grows strong enough to no longer need the support. And it's kind of the same way with kids, is there's levels of support at every age, but eventually that support becomes less and less. In my experience, I kind of had a tighter grip from my dad in terms of my direction for growth. And he had good intentions. He told me that he wanted me to do what I felt was best, but that was still within a certain guideline.
Right.
And that just did not work for me. So we had conflict between when I lived with him at age 17 up until maybe my mid 20s, even early 20s. There was definitely a level of conflict there. And then I think, we kind of wore that out and realized that, I'm just going to do things my way. And I understood the way he was. So I still function in his box because I was, living with him and needed to play by his rules, so to speak, in order to get along. Otherwise, it would just be like World War in the house or whatever. So I did that, and I conformed to his standards. So I think the role model is an important position, because it's not putting the young adult or the young man into a box. And that can be really challenging, because in order for us to be the healthiest role model, we have to let go of our preconceived ideas and judgments about what it means to be a man or what direction someone's life should take.
That's challenge too. It's not easy. It's not easy. It won't happen in one day or over the night. I just want to ask you one more question in the same situation. Like, do you have any kind of like situations when you are helping youth? Like any particular incident that you cannot really, something like, let's say, even if you help 20 people or a number of people, but one or two, it is really hurting or something that you cannot forget easily. Do you have any kind of stories, or even when you are helping the particular individual, but also you had to deal with the parents too, right? Do you have any kind of situation? Can you share?
Yeah, I've said whenever I work with children, or not children, but young men, typically age 17 has been the minimum age. The parents have always been involved to some degree, in the sense that I'll keep them updated on the progress. I'll let them know from my perspective, like how to support their kid best, because it's going to require, because the kid has the problem because the parent had the problem. That's important to understand, that the fruits are a byproduct of the roots of the tree.
Of course, yeah.
And the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, as the saying goes. So yeah, there's definitely a degree of shift that takes place in the parent, but my work's predominantly been with the child. When the interesting thing, though, is by the time a child, a kid or a person is 17, 18 years old, they have really all the faculties they need to be successful, and they can make decisions for themselves. So my work, like I said before, largely revolves around letting go of these subconscious programs. So a lot of their hardships can be dissolved quite quickly.
Yeah.
In fact, younger people have, in general, a much easier time of letting go of the past than adults do. So I find the work can go quite quickly. I find that, for example, one gentleman's school grades increased from, he was kind of like a low to mid 80s student, conforming to what he felt was the best approach to school. So he felt safe with what he was doing, but he felt like there was something deeper inside himself that he wasn't allowing to express.
Right.
And so through our work, he did that, and we just tried it. And I said to him, hey, just try, try doing it on your next test. It wasn't a major test. And just, rather than play by the rules as you've been doing, just express yourself more, do what you think and feel is best for you. And he did, and he ended up getting the highest mark in the class, of like a mid 90 mark. And he continued to practice that on all of his subsequent tests. And he graduated at the top of his class in high school, and had a great final year. And he felt fully fulfilled and fully self-expressed, like he wasn't pushing any part of himself down. So that's a huge liberty. And it really wasn't a big shift to make. He just needed to give himself permission to do it.
Right, exactly. So the people you are helping right now, or even in the past, let's not talk about the just one more question for you. The age between, I would say like a 30, about 30, 35 and up to 50, 55, between that age range. What did you see common, or generally speaking, what would you see nowadays, especially in the society? It doesn't matter like any particular ethnic group, but it's overall.
Yeah. Well, I find most people in that age bracket, particularly in the late 40s to 50s, they have a lot of that past conditioning that they're carrying around. So, and that tends to start creeping up around that age bracket. So if someone hasn't dealt with this stuff from childhood, they'll start seeing it play out more and more between age 35 and 55.
Right.
And some people manage to cope with it or control it depending on the extent and the threshold of the emotion. But some people really start to explore like why they feel this way, why their life keeps repeating certain patterns. So obviously the people I'm working with are the ones more in the exploration stage. And I find they really want to make a transformation. I mean, nobody comes to me that is kind of lukewarm about wanting to be more successful. Like they absolutely want it. And I'm fortunate now where my process is really gentle. It doesn't require a lot of like hard work or anything for them to release the past. It just requires a deep willingness and allows them to experience their emotions rather than suppress their emotions. But that's my job as a facilitator. So I typically find, the 35 to 45 are really open-minded, really successful. Like it's easy for them to let go more or less, particularly if they have a professionally established career. But once they get into the mid 40s and above, it can be a little more dense. It could take a little bit more work for sure. They're hanging on for sure. There's more drama, in general. So, and that's just a generational thing. I mean, because their parents typically, like if someone's, late 40s, 50s, and 60s, their parents may be privy to like World War,
Right. Yeah.
So anyone who has a closer memory of that
Mhm.
typically is carrying more baggage, whereas the younger generation,
Mhm.
they're 2 or sometimes 3 generations away from any global conflict like that. So that's not ruminating in their thought process as much as
Right.
older people.
So I would ask you one question about what's the one thing you can say? Like, let's say I hear, because of the question, I hear a lot of people between those age group, but they cannot come out, or they don't want to come out and then say it openly or have a discussion, open discussion, right? Particularly in our community, but generally speaking, I also heard from some other communities too, different ethnic groups too, because they scared, or they kind of have a concern about the family and the kids' future, and the society, and so many things. Friends, what they're going to think about this or that. So they don't really come out and then talk about it. So the fear is there. So what's the one thing, or what they can do initially, because over the time it will add up, it will build in, and then it's going to be explored somewhere somehow, right? So what you can, from your coaching, or facilitating those program situations, how do you help them?
So there's kind of 2 things to unpack there, because there's a segment of adults who aren't ready for coaching because they're not fully ready to look at themselves.
Yeah.
So for those, I would say, hey, if someone is dealing with stress or struggle or internal conflict, but they're not really ready to transform it,
Hmm.
just having a support group is really the healthiest thing. A men's group,
Yeah.
in particular. Women have this figured out naturally anyway. They're intuitive. They don't need advice on this. They
Exactly. Yeah.
But for men, they keep it internal, right? So a men's group, I think, would be really a great start. Um, and it's often better in a group than one-to-one, I find, because I find men one-to-one, it can feel a little too intimate, a little too personal
Yeah.
when you're opening up. But if there's 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7, and I wouldn't go more than 6 or 7 if you're having a men's group, um, then it feels safer, right? It's more, it's a safer environment, and men, like they're more like a locker room environment, for
Right.
example.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're kind of creating that. It's definitely different because you're not firing shots at one another, criticizing, but it's a safe environment. And
Hmm.
to say that, that's a good way to put it. Um, I think for someone that's ready to open up,
Yeah.
then definitely my process involves, number one, letting go of the disapproval we have, letting go of the judgments that we have, letting go of trying to figure out why we're in the situation that we're in, because that's really what leads to self-abuse, is when we beat ourselves up about being in the position that we're in.
Hmm.
Then we can't really get out of it, because it just turns into a vicious cycle. So the first step is really letting go of those judgments, and then that naturally leads into letting go of disapproval of ourselves, letting go of disapproval of others, that our parents, ourselves, for making past decisions. Because in Buddhism, for example, I'm not religious, but it's just a good analogy to say that the Buddha said when we hang on to judgment or disapproval about someone or something, it's like drinking poison and expecting someone else to be harmed, right? That's not how our emotions work. Yet we're kind of conditioned to feel like if we hang on to resentment, somehow that's going to keep us safe, or
Yeah.
it's going to make the other person suffer or bring justice to the situation. But that's just not how it works. So when we can let go of the disapproval, we can start to free our mind, and we can start to free our emotions, and then we're in a position where we can start giving love and approval to
Yeah.
someone or something, including ourselves. Love and approval is really the highest state to come from, because that's what allows life to happen.
Yeah.
When we're resisting things, we're in a consistent state of stress and anxiety or fear. But when we're loving and approving of things, including ourselves, that's when our health gets better. Our mind, we have more mental peace, we have greater spiritual freedom, and our physical vitality can improve, often exponentially and often very quickly. It's really that, I was going to call it a mindset shift, but it's really opening our heart
Yeah,
to
yeah.
heal that, you know, and that certainly not every man is ready to experience that.
Mm.
And not every woman is either, but, you know, in my experience, I typically assist more women than men with that process.
Right. So, Franz, so far, Matthew actually, he's, shared a lot of things, especially his life experience, life journey, because it's not only one or two instances, it's a lot of different stages, as a young boy, starting from 3 years old, and then when you're growing up, and then also now, so you can see those different stages, different age categories, and then see what are the challenges. So I personally strongly believe that, somewhere, somehow, that one of those moments, you can relate to that moment, and then see, how you can change your life. And then now he is helping a lot of youths, and then also adults too. So because of the struggle or challenges, or any life situations, now he's actually molded, and then he's helping a lot of people too, right? The method, or the any format what he's following, but it's really helping other people too, because one soul or one man struggles, and then somebody else get help, and then they can change their lifestyle too. So this is what we want to create, just the awareness. Okay, you know what? If I bring people, or whoever is willing to share their stories, and some other people who is listening, they can see, they can relate to that. Or even you can take this message to those people, actually the truth is, whoever is affected, or going through the life challenges, they don't really come out, and then they don't see social media, or they are not on any platform. But at least as a friend, as a neighbor, or you can pass this message, and then you can share with somebody. You know what? Okay, you know what? There's a hope. There's a place. There's a people you can talk to them, because a lot of times they don't reach out, or they don't talk to anybody, and then end up with taking their own life, right? So as I always say, like, it's not sad about seeing suicidal or death, but it's not acceptable, or it's not, we cannot really just that, like one soul come, and then suddenly within very young age, even 15 or 20 or 30 years old, they made a suicide, and then not only them, but also the whole environment, the whole family, whole relationship, like the entire family. It's going through a lot of emotion, and struggles, or whatever, So this is the idea. You just want to create one kind of, or the intention. I just want to bring it out, creating awareness. So again, this live show actually comes on Sundays from 10 to 10:30. Sometimes, for example, today we just went to a little bit over, because people like him in the training or coaching, or helping on the social service side expert, when we talk about a little bit more. Yeah, more than 30 minutes. It's not a business call, so it's a kind of also healing call, so they can share their life stories, and then any situations, right? So there's no gender limitation. There's no what do you call age limitations. You can join from any part of the world. So it's not only men can or want to talk about a men's issue. Any ladies or girls, you can come out, and then you can talk about your father. You can talk about your friend. You can talk about somebody else, because those whoever affected, or those going through that, they don't really come out, and then they are not going to sit down and then talk about their struggles, right? So on behalf of those people, you can talk about it, right? So this is what we want to hear from you guys, though. So I know I'm hearing a lot of feedbacks, input lately, but it's really giving encouragement. More than that, it's really doing something worthwhile for some people. So the message is getting out there, right? So again, Voice of Men 360, open up, live talk. This is in English. Anyone who wants to join and share your life stories, please message me, or you can find on Facebook, Voice of Men 360. Again, thank you, big thank you. I really appreciate Matthew for your willingness and then come out and then share these life moments. It's not easy. But I see slowly people are coming out, and then they are sharing their life story because there's a platform. They believe, okay, you know what, there I can share it. Okay, so if you don't want to share your life stories, that's fine. But you can talk about in general. But at least talk about men's issues or voice issues. Okay, so thank you, Matthew, once more. And really looking forward to working with you. And of course, we already are working on a couple of things. Thank you for your support too. And everybody, thank you. Please share your inputs. One word, one message, one event, one journey. Let's make a positive impact on other people's lives. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Take care.